Living in a real-time world, and as Matt just demonstrated to you, it's pretty great. There's all sorts of things we can do today that wouldn't have been possible even just a decade ago. But there are also some older experiences, not all, but some, that are pretty nice, and, you know, they were great before things got so fast. For example, something like this, you know, getting postcards from people. When does that happen anymore? Or sitting around watching the telly together is another example. And increasingly, I think that we're feeling a little bit nostalgic for these because they don't fit in with this real-time world that we've created for ourselves anymore. So our question to you as product people is, have you ever wanted to, or been asked to, recreate an older experience like this online? Anyone? Like, yeah, quite a few of you. So I think that even if you haven't yet, you probably will in the future. And I know that we certainly have. So Matt and I spent the last 7 years working in online music together, and most of that time was spent at Last.fm, where I headed up design, he headed up product. And you know, this thing kept on happening to us. Time after time, we'd be sitting in meetings, and people would start talking about this. People would start talking about this experience because it's so wonderful and it's so human and it's just so much fun to share records with people that you like, and you can discover some music and they play some music for you and you talk on top of the music and you get to know them better and you make new friends and everyone has fun. It's awesome. And every time it sort of came back to this, like, how do we take this? How do we take the essence of this experience? How do we package it up and somehow give it to people online? How do we recreate this? So in this presentation, we're going to take you through a few of the recent themes that we've seen in online music apps lately and how successful they've been in actually recreating this thrill. But then we want to share with you one experimental approach that we used in developing the concept for our new music service, This Is My Jam. And we think it could be useful not just for something like music, but really anything where you want to take some of that nostalgia out of an older experience and put it in the online world. So let's start by talking about some of the default ways you might share music today. So the first most obvious one was with the real-time world. We thought, hey, you know what? Let's just make it real time. Let's do this. And we're guilty of this right here. That was Last.fm. So let's just say what everyone is listening to. But there was other ways too. Lots of people share YouTube videos on Facebook, for instance. You get this kind of stuff. People sharing music on Twitter is also really common. And you even get people making Spotify playlists. That's one I made of clavinets. And you can share them with your friends that way. So we actually have more ways than ever before to listen to music online, as well as to share it with our friends. So what's the problem, right? Well, there's a few. So the first one is that things like Twitter and Facebook, they're built around the time of chatter, of talk. They're not really built for music. Music takes a while to consume. It takes some time to listen to, right? Also, you blink and you miss it. It's gone. And then that leads me to the second problem here, which is like later, when I do have the time and wherewithal and I'm sitting in my lounge and I want to listen to that music, where do I find it? All that music that my friends posted this week, it's gone, poof, like disappeared off the bottom of my feed, right? And also, how do you know what the good stuff is in there? Is that just something that they were listening to in passing that I saw on my Facebook ticker? Were they just checking out a new album? Or is that something that they really, really care about? Is that the one that is meaningful to them? And what about all that personal context? These record sleeves, these conversations that we have, these beers we're drinking, what happened to all that? But then something really interesting happened. A couple of years ago, we got to the point where actually we could recreate this entire thing online if we wanted to. And so people did. So this is one experiment here. It's called Listening Room. It was a very simple, pared-down approach to friends playing records for each other. And here's another one that you probably recognize called Turntable FM. And this was all about, again, playing music to your friends, and you could be a DJ and sit in a DJ booth up there. And we thought, this is amazing, right? This is going to solve all of our problems right here. This is what we've been waiting for. And actually, so did everybody else. And these are some of the press clippings from the time. Everybody was so excited about this. There was users and investors flocking to these products. People even tried to make a clone of it. Facebook even got in on the action. That's how excited everybody was. So what happened? Well, unfortunately, it didn't really turn out like that. Somehow, these experiences just didn't seem to stick for users. And things kind of started looking like this. Listening Room actually shut down. And Turntable kind of looks like that right now. And it left us all feeling really sad and scratching our heads and, questioning, why didn't this work out? What happened here? How come this just doesn't still feel as good as that?
So what did happen? The first thing to say is that online music is very hard. And there's always many reasons, if a product doesn't stick or doesn't get traction. But the one that I think we want to focus on today is we think that something like Turntable might have actually modeled this older nostalgic experience a little too closely. Because it turns out it takes, if you have a virtual room, it takes just as much energy and coordination, if not more, to get everyone together in an online virtual room as it does in real life. And the problem there is that people don't necessarily use music this way in their lives. Their existing online behaviors didn't really lend most people the amount of time you need to constantly use Turntable as your source of sharing music or even consuming music. It sort of required a bit too much care and feeding. So we sort of saw a challenge there. It's clear that there's something pretty potent here. And I think things like Turntable showed that there's still a lot of user excitement and goodwill around an experience that can evoke an older one. So what are better approaches for tackling, in our case, what was kind of this holy grail experience in online music? How can we evoke that? How can we take the same set of problems but just look at it differently and maybe produce a completely different product at the end of it? And we really decided that it came down to choosing the right constraints. and building a story that would attract users to your product. And story is a key word there. I think that we can learn a lot about products from storytelling, and I'm not just saying that because I'm dressed like an English professor. But having said that, I hope you'll permit a small detour into the world of storytelling, because I think that there was a breakthrough made about 100 years ago in storytelling that could be useful to us here. So, if you'll permit me. This is Dashiell Hammett, groundbreaking American author in the hard-boiled detective genre. In fact, you could say that he practically invented it. And in 1930, he wrote a very groundbreaking and incredibly popular novel. It was called, anyone? The Maltese Falcon. Now, the Maltese Falcon was such a hit with its readership that within a year, something pretty cool was happening, which was that Warner Brothers came around and they said, hey, we have these new things. It's like movies, but people can talk in them. They're called talkies. We want to make one out of the Maltese Falcon. So 1931, less than a year later, they made a very successful film. They decided to call it The Maltese Falcon. Go figure. Then 5 years passes. People have short attention spans, even in the 30s. There's this new actress named Bette Davis. Why don't we do it again? Why don't we take this story, make a new film out of it, and we're going to call it... So this one actually is the only one that didn't do well. I'm not saying they made an obvious mistake, but maybe they should have called it something else. But it doesn't matter, because 1941 came around, and they really got it right this time. They put Humphrey Bogart in it, and they called it The Maltese Falcon, thankfully. And this is now regarded as just one of the classic thrillers of all time. So looking back on this sort of 11 years of critical success with The Maltese Falcon, you might be forgiven for guessing that the mystery and the excitement at the heart of this story centers around, I don't know, a falcon from Malta, maybe, one that looks like that. But the strange thing is it actually doesn't. It takes about halfway through the plot before the falcon's even explained. It's apparently a jewel-encrusted figurine of a bird that's so valuable that they covered it in black enamel to hide how valuable it actually is. But by the end of the story, the only falcon that anyone in the story has even touched turns out to be fake. And the audience is left wondering where the real falcon is, or actually if it even exists at all. So this is actually doubly weird when you think of what detective stories were like before this. So, it's very much the Agatha Christie model, Sherlock Holmes. It's very much, this game we played, when we were younger, called Cluedo. It's really about, who did it with what blunt object in what room of the house. And this was really the whodunit style of mystery. So if the Maltese Falcon was one of these, it would just be a whodunit where the bird is a strategic clue, and at the end it ties everything together. But something very different is actually happening here. And so there's a useful lesson in the function of the Maltese Falcon in the story, The Maltese Falcon. And the function it performs in the story actually has a name. And this name was popularized by this man, and he called it a MacGuffin. So definition slide, how are we doing? So what's a MacGuffin? It's an object that sets the plot in motion. It gets everyone's attention, and it starts the action rolling. But the important thing about it is sometimes by the end, it's completely forgotten. And the audience has had so much fun along the way that they don't even really care that that initial thing that got it all going has vanished. So it's one of those sort of journey is the reward type things. And MacGuffins are actually, by now, a very standard device in lots of things. So some more modern examples that you may know is the contents of the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. It doesn't actually matter, although it does glow. And MacGuffins have to glow, actually. That seems to be a thing. So, and here's, of course, the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark. These are also sort of classic MacGuffins. So why am I talking about MacGuffins? Besides the fact that, yes, I wish I was an English professor, I actually think that they're a useful concept, and there might be some tricks or some lessons here that we can borrow as product makers. Because it has a lot of good effects. So MacGuffins attract an audience. They also trigger action. And everyone has a good time along the way. So what I would like to propose as a bit of a thought experiment, and this is sort of pretty new for us as well, is that we ask ourselves, what would a product MacGuffin be? And I think the question inside of that is, how would you approach building a product or designing a product differently if the original experience or feeling or nostalgic thing that you're trying to evoke, instead of treating that like your product's endgame or spec, what if you treat that just as a MacGuffin for your own product? So what would change if you think about it that way? Any beer left?
So I'm going to talk to you now about designing This Is My Jam and coming up with the concept behind it. So about a year ago, we started thinking about what would our version of this holy grail music experience of Records and Friends look like. And, well, there's a couple of things we knew. We knew that this wasn't really working. It's a little bit lackluster compared to what we've got there. And we also knew that this didn't stick. So, okay, where does that leave us? So, instead of trying to faithfully recreate this, we decided to look more closely at the mechanics. So what really makes this experience tick here? Obligatory slide with sticky notes on it. So the first thing we did is we looked at the outcomes. So what are the great things about this experience here, right? What makes this really awesome? Well, there's a bunch of things. The quality of music is really high. You have these great conversations on top of it. You make new friends, and you have fun. You connect with people. So then from there, we looked at the behaviors. So what are the things that actually produce this outcome? So we looked at the behaviors, and there's a couple of great ones in here as well that we really liked. Like, there's a performance aspect here. The reason the music is such a high quality is because people are only playing the songs they know and love and want to share with their friends, which means that all the records that are being played today, they're not just anything, they're like really good songs. And then after that, we looked at the constraints, because this is what, to some degree, forces those behaviors. This is sort of how it gets started, right? And again, we highlighted a couple that we thought were really interesting. For instance, you can only play one thing at a time on that record player. So I want to talk about these constraints in a bit more detail, because this is really what sets off the chain reaction. This is what gets the ball rolling here. Depending on which constraints you choose, that's going to elicit different behaviors, and you're going to have different outcomes, right? So you'll notice that if you've used Turntable, if you know about the product, that a lot of things about it, actually, they used a lot of these constraints from real life. It happens in the same room, it happens in real time, you need to bring your friends with you, blah, 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 et cetera. And we thought, okay, well, what if we try to reduce these constraints down to just the one that we think we need to elicit this outcome without all the other stuff? We had a hunch that if we could keep the product simple, we could evoke this experience with just the smallest number of constraints. And so we started crossing them off. We crossed off anything that wasn't compatible with existing online behaviors. We crossed off anything that didn't make sense with the music ecosystem online. And we also crossed off anything that wasn't directly responsible for that specific behavior that we wanted to get to. And this is what we were left with. You can only share one thing at a time. And that is how the design for This Is My Jam started. So here's the experiment that we tried, right? It's really simple. You get a profile. You can only share one song at a time. It's not just any song. It's that song you really love. It's that song that's been on your iPod on repeat. It's that one that, I brought home from the record store today and I just want to put on. And then you get a playlist of all your friends' selections to listen to as well. That's it. And so, well, how did this work out for us? The other thing here is that to make sure you have time to listen to all this music as well, talking about pace, is that, the song here that we're playing today, that's like 3.5 minutes long. That's the average length of a pop song. We decided, let's leave it up on your profile for 7 days so that we can make sure all your friends have time to listen to it. And also, there's an interesting mechanic here at work as well about changing your jam, too, is when you take one off, when you take one song off the record player, there's something going on there because you're replacing it with something else. And so what was the outcome here? Well, the outcome was that actually the quality of music on Jam is really high. If you load the popular page on pretty much any day, it looks something like this. So we've got, Yuma Sumac, Prince, Sam Cooke, Michael Jackson, like all sorts of really great music on there. And this was so exciting for us to see when this happened, because we were like, it's working, the experiment is working. That constraint that we defined is actually eliciting these outcomes, which is the quality of music goes way up and the signal-to-noise ratio for that. But, you know, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have said that we should give it a better name.
I was thinking records with friends is kind of catchy.
But we got there in the end. You know, it's really great to see people saying things like this, because it means that it is working to a degree, that people feel like they are sharing records with friends, even though there's no virtual living room, there's no DJ booth, there's none of this stuff going on. It's just having fun along the way. Cool.
So, the next time you, or maybe someone you work with, or someone you work for, gets that urge, which is you know that thing we used to do, or that thing we loved, or remember that time when we, you know, how do we make the online version of that? Or how do we make, you know, this thing from before the internet? How do we, you know, how do we get it in our pockets? How do we get it in our lives again? The next time someone asks you to do that, you know, don't sweat it, and maybe try something that worked recently for Hannah and I, which is stealing a classic trick from storytelling. And that's the trick of the MacGuffin. So go from saying, all right, this is our product, we just need to figure out, you know, how it lives online, to saying, no, this isn't our product, it's our product's MacGuffin. Now, has everyone seen Raiders of the Lost Ark? Most, you know, I don't know, yeah, okay. So if you ask someone, what's your favorite bit from Raiders of the Lost Ark? I can almost guarantee you that no one will say, oh, the bit where the Ark comes out. Although we all like seeing, you know, melting Nazis or whatever. But it's usually not stuff like, oh, the bit where the Ark, you know, comes out. It's normally stuff like, oh, that bit where, you know, Indy's walking through the crowd and there's the epic sword guy, and he defeats the sword guy with his gun, because of course that's how you beat a sword guy, with your gun from 20 feet away. And it's moments like this that make Raiders, you know, as a story so enjoyable. It's all that fun you have along the way, rather than, you know, focused on this arc. And so key to doing this, key to you know, thinking about product MacGuffins and trying to evoke a real-life experience or a remembered experience or something nostalgic, is to spend a lot of time with that experience. So you need to know what makes it tick. You need to know how it feels. And so for Hannah and I, you know, it's no accident that we spent 7 years working together in online music, and now something that, you know, on the surface seems really simple, this is my jam, has emerged. We didn't actually start with those stickies. You know, it started years before that, listening to music together. It's really important that if you do want to sort of drag one of these experiences into a new domain, that you do have that felt experience and that you can base it on that as a starting point. And if you can do that successfully, I think that lived experience is what gives you the understanding necessary to tease those constraints out, to realize what are the constraints that actually drive this, and then to compare the online experiences that people are already enjoying and really finding that smallest intersection of the ones that matter. And when you look at problems this way, sometimes you actually discover surprising things. So one example is a lot of companies and people and hackers have taken a run at this idea of a collaborative TV or movie watching experience. So, you know, why can't we have a virtual, real-time, simultaneous experience of watching TV together? But it turns out if you look at what makes that experience nice, you know, people say small, witty things to one another across the sofa, but not so much that it interrupts what's happening. And then if you also think about the fact that these days, you know, users of products don't really care about the distinction between offline and online. They're prepared happily to mix the two. You actually realize that, you know what, we already have this collaborative TV watching experience. Anyone who had Twitter on a second screen during the Olympics, especially the opening and closing ceremonies, knows that it was basically this hive mind. It was like being in your lounge room with 200 occasionally very witty people. So by really focusing on the constraints rather than the wood paneling in the lounge room with the television, sometimes you actually can evoke the experience a heck of a lot better than you would if you just went straight into simulating it online. And finally, and I know this is a common refrain today, but I think for good reason, One advantage of whittling down the constraints to maybe just one is that it becomes much, much easier to build a product on top of that you can get in front of people sooner and that you can test it, because it's very difficult. You might pick the wrong constraint or half of the wrong constraint, and it's much easier to find that out than building the sort of kitchen sink product with the 3D immersive virtual reality headset and then discovering that actually, that's no longer interesting or relevant to people. So it's really important to do that as well and to test those concepts out. And if you do that, someone in this room could have a hair and mustache as fine as Dashiell Hammett and actually do what he did when he wrote the Maltese Falcon, which was take something that people were familiar with, the detective story, and drag it into actually unfamiliar but very entertaining territory. We think that the big opportunity out there today is in creating products that are informed by the past, that evoke these past experiences that we know in our hearts and we know how they feel, but take their audiences somewhere new, somewhere wholly different, and hopefully somewhere quite delightful, somewhere for us where it's really okay to talk and talk and talk about your favorite song, and to feel like even though we're all checking in at different times, in different parts of the world, that maybe we are just, sitting in a lounge playing our favorite songs to one another. Thanks a lot.